I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. Wow. Let the shredding begin. You look at Trump today going full bore after Dr. Ford. It was a hoax. Hey, she was credible. She was credible. It was a hoax. It was disgraceful. It was those evil Democrats. They tortured a good man. Susan Collins. I don't believe that Brett Kavanaugh was her assailant. I do believe she was assaulted, but I don't know by whom. I have no idea who. Don't know who the assailant was. Some other white guy. You know, they all look alike. Lindsey Graham. He's going to take to the streets. He's going to go after those bad Democrats, those evil Democrats who had the audacity, because he's disgusted. He's angry. Never seen his colleagues act in such a way, and he's going to take to the street because he's going to do something about it, by God. He's going to get them out of office and get crazy people like him in. And this is kind of where we are. This is kind of the polarized world in which we now find ourselves, especially over this nominee, who is flawed across the spectrum. He is an extremist. He is not somebody who belongs on the court. And interestingly enough, the reports are now coming out, and there's part of me that wonders, and don't take this the wrong way, but from the beginning, I knew this was going nowhere, that the white guys on the Senate Judiciary Committee were not going to do anything to hold anyone accountable, and that Kavanaugh would be on the court. But we're now finding that a number of circuit judges, a number of judicial people have filed complaints about his temperament and about all kinds of stuff that evidently John Roberts has had, but has decided, well, who knows, maybe we won't do anything about it. And now that the confirmation process has been rammed through, we're never going to know what those complaints were. And this is the reason you don't allow the hurry up, quickie kind of ram it through, ram it down our throats, shove it up our behinds, however you want to use as the right descriptive terms. This is the reason you don't do that. This is the reason you don't have that kind of hurry up process. It's the reason that you have due process. It's the reason that we want a little bit longer confirmation so that we don't make a huge mistake, of which I think we have. I think we have made an enormous mistake. And, I just had this kind of pit of the stomach, gut feeling, kind of like when you've eaten something that's really terrible, and you're about ready to, you're on that verge, you got the taste in the back of your mouth, and you're about ready to go. I felt this all day long as I watched the video clip of Trump and Kavanaugh, and I watched the swearing in with Roberts and Kavanaugh and the family, and I had one of these moments because as a parent, you teach your kids to make good choices. You teach your kids to live decent, honorable lives. You teach them to not make big mistakes. You're going to make mistakes, make a whole bunch of them. Just make sure they're really small ones. Nothing, don't be good to others. Open the door for little old ladies. All the things that I was raised believing, that solidly working class ethic of live by the golden rule. Treat people with dignity and respect, and all of this stuff. And as I watched Roberts and Kavanaugh, and as I watched this all unfold, I looked at his kids, and I'm going, what message does this send? Not just for his children, but for mine and for everyone's children. When you can have this kind of allegation, and you can see the kind of behavior that you saw in that testimony that he gave, the kind of defiance, the kind of belligerence, the kind of, disrespect for authority, disrespect for institution, as he attacked the senators, as he, spewed conspiracy, he won. And look, he was always going to win. I said that from the beginning. There was never a question in my mind that he would be seated on the Supreme Court. But I look at this and, what message does this send? Because, my wife and I have had these discussions about how do we raise our kids? Do we raise them with the same kind of values and ethics that we were raised with? That, like I said, you do unto others, you treat people with dignity, respect, you work hard, you play by the rules, and ultimately you will get ahead. Or do you just screw it? I'm going to stomp on whatever I have to, crush whatever, stab whoever in the back, to get ahead. And this is what I see how this whole thing played out. And it's not just Kavanaugh. It's the Republicans and how they rammed this process through. It's how they stole the Gorsuch seat. What message does this send for people like me who believe that you work hard, you play by the rules, and that you stay on course, and that you stay within the confines of the rules and all of this, because there are rules? Or is it just that there are rules for the working class? Is it just that there are rules for people like you and me and our children? But when you get to the heights of someone like Kavanaugh, or someone like the Trumps, or someone like the Bushes, or even the Clintons for that matter, does it matter? Does all of that working class ethic matter? Or is it a hindrance? And are we actually, by teaching our kids to the whole concept that I grew up with of playing by the rules and working really hard and all of that stuff, is that hindering their ability to get ahead? Should we be raising all of our kids to be little Republicans who stab people in the back and slit each other's throats for pennies and nickels? Should that be what we do? And I can't make an argument against it right now. I'm looking at the fact that guy who testified on that Thursday is now seated on the U.S. Supreme Court. He is one of the 9 most powerful human beings in this country. He will have ultimate say because it's a divided 4-4 court. He will be the decider. As where Anthony Kennedy was the most powerful guy because he was, a little smidge moderate. This guy's all the way to the extreme. And they're saying, well, he's not quite as far as Thomas. Yes, he is. And he's going to, his decisions over the next year, 2, 5, 10 are going to be horribly destructive. And the question is, how do you rebound from that? How do you fight back against what we know is coming? How do you stop the assault on women's rights, on workers' rights, on minority rights? How do you stop what you see right now as reality? And now Susan Collins, interestingly enough, she said, well, Planned Parenthood, they're disingenuous because, they say it all the time. Anytime a Republican puts somebody up for the Supreme Court, they always, cry their hair's on fire and that Roe versus Wade is dead. And look, I've had a number of conservatives recently tell me that, Kavanaugh's not going to vote to overturn Roe. That's not going to happen. It's a dead issue. It's a settled law. It's the law of the land. And I go, really? Do you want to wager on that? Because I truly believe he was put there for that. And much more than just that. It's all of the other stuff. We are now, I would argue, heading towards a complete and total corporatocracy. You can use the word fascism if you like. We are heading in that direction to where corporate and government interests will no longer be. You'll never see the difference. And the more I watched of Mitch McConnell and his BS, justifications, and Lindsey Graham and his, feigned outrage, and Donald Trump and, saying, oh, he's a good man. And Susan Collins trying to justify. The more I look at this, the more angry I get at a system that doesn't care about working people. And I would argue never has. We've just deluded ourselves. But I couldn't help but feel that in the pit of my stomach today, that the bad guys won. That again, the black hats won. That again, the criminals got away. And, at the end of it, it's I know it will subside, and I know the fire and the anger will return. But for today, I'm just a little distraught. And at the end of it, what does this mean? Ultimately, it's going to mean we're going to need to organize more. It's going to mean that come November, you better get your behinds into the polls. And, hey, people living in Pennsylvania, Tuesday the 9th, last day to register. Last day to check to make sure that you're registered. Because November is just around the corner. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, I got a bunch of emails over the weekend about the UPS contract and what the Teamsters were doing with the negotiating, and the concept of the two-tier wage system popped up. And I said, you know what, I want to talk a little bit about that. So when we come back, I'm going to talk with Gene Elk, organizing director at UE, about what they've done to push back against two-tier wage systems and why they're a bad idea. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back with Gene Elk. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1933. That was the day garment factory owners locked out dressmakers in several shops throughout Los Angeles. The women garment workers, overwhelmingly Mexican, had been organizing with the ILGWU for over a month. They began conducting strikes at selected shops the previous month to press their demands. The women wanted union recognition, a 35-hour work week, end to homework, shop floor committees, a guaranteed wage, and more. Historian Douglas Monroy observed that their demands reflected the harsh working conditions that they faced. It was a volatile, competitive seasonal industry. Businesses worked tirelessly to undercut each other and job out the work. Women workers were routinely unemployed or underemployed, subject to widespread wage theft and discrimination. They were frustrated by promises of the new Industrial Recovery Act, which promised the right to organize but held no provisions for enforcement. Employers flaunted the new legislation and continued to discharge workers for union activity. When the employers forced a lockout, Local 96 looked to the AFL's Central Labor Council to sanction a general dressmakers strike, which started 4 days later on October 12th. As many as 3,000 Latina strikers maintained solid picket lines despite dozens of arrests. ILGWU organizer Rose Posada arrived from New York to help with food distribution and packing the picket lines. The rank-and-file leadership produced a bilingual strike bulletin and made daily radio announcements. The strike ended in arbitration that conceded few gains to the garment workers. But the women of Local 96 continued to organize throughout the Los Angeles area. They led a series of strikes that would eventually win the closed shop. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Everything's raising but the wages. Everything's raising but the wages. Gasoline, groceries, and our wages. Everything's raising but the wages.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick at thericksmithshow.com. So got a lot of email over the weekend. Evidently, the Teamsters UPS contract was voted down by the members. The negotiating committee accepted the offer. So there's been some turmoil, and I got tons of email about, two-tier wage systems and all of this stuff, because UPS has this weird kind of thing where the package handlers make like $14 an hour, but the drivers make considerably more. Now, they're not doing the exact same job, so it's not really the same kind of thing, but it is creating division. Which is what this is supposed to do. So when you had all the package handlers saying, no, our contract sucks, and the other guy saying, no, it's okay, you create this kind of division. And I wanted to spend a little time, because it came back to the idea of having a two-tier wage system in place. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that today, which is why I've asked Gene Elk to come talk with us. Gene is the director of organizing with UE. Gene, thanks for taking time for us.
No problem. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, my gut instinct is whenever you have this kind of discrepancy in pay from one worker to another, be it one skill to another, be it the same job, it really is nothing more than just tearing apart at the fabric of the union, and also causing major division within the workforce.
Well, I mean, the key issue is when a union gets into a fight, it's got to have solidarity between the members in order to win that fight. And when you've got one group of people that are earning $20 below what another group of people are earning, it certainly leads to a situation where folks are going to say this is unfair, and that there are internal divisions that prevent people from fighting.
I remember
that's what
when
a union's all about.
Yeah, I remember when the whole two-tier wage system started popping up. It's been about 20 years ago, maybe even longer than. But for me, it was about 20 years ago when it started first popping up. And it was, to me, it was all about, hey, how can we divide people up? But everyone was saying, no, this is how, the union members get to keep what they got. And, we'll just take it out on the people who are coming behind us. And I go, that's really a bad idea.
Oh, it's an awful idea. The old trade union principle is that we pay people for the work they perform, not who they are, or not the accident of when they're hired. And this divides people rather than unifies people. And I got to tell you, UE's experience has been exactly the opposite. We have opposed two-tier wage schemes, and don't get me wrong, we've had some two-tier wage schemes in our union because our members run their local unions, and there are some locals that have accepted those things. And we've fought to get rid of them wherever we could. And it's especially true in the fight against right to work. How can you have one class of employees saying that they're going to be union members who are making $20 an hour more than another class of employees who are union members as well and paying similar amounts of dues? It doesn't make sense for anyone. So, I'm just not a good thing for us.
No, and it's not. But it goes back to all the years. I've been a Teamster for 30 years now, and I remember learning the concept of a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. Equal work, equal pay. That whole mentality. And yet, we've been almost trained to believe that, this is going to help the business, and if the business can hire more people, then we're going to be secure, and all of that corporate speak that they've thrown out. When ultimately, what it ends up being is more profit for them, more in the hands of the CEO because their pay never goes down, and less for everybody else who actually does the work.
No, that's exactly right, and that's been our experience. UE has long represented General Electric workers throughout the U.S., and one of the unions who bargains collectively with us, with GE, typically negotiates these two-tier agreements, and GE says, hey, this is the way that we'll save jobs. And their plants close just like everybody else's plants close in GE. It doesn't solve the problem. It just gives the company a nice parting gift as they're leaving town.
Yeah, I look at this, and again, a guy made the argument over the weekend that, the union company pays like a 30% premium for wages, and they've got to be able to compete. So instead of taking it out on your senior people, the people who are there, we're just gonna lower the standard for the next person. I go, well, think about that from a standpoint of what are you leaving your children? What are you leaving for the next generation? What legacy are you leaving? I think of my grandparents. My grandparents left a legacy of high wages, of the 8-hour day, of healthcare benefits that you didn't have to pay for, of defined benefit pension, safer workplaces. They left a legacy for their kids that, they ultimately destroyed, but they still left a great legacy.
But why should a younger worker who comes into a plant that's earning $15 an hour or less, why should that individual have any kind of allegiance to the union? In fact, what you're telling him is, or her, you're telling them that they should not be joining the union because the union has no allegiance to them. I mean, this is against all trade union principles, every single one of them.
Do you fear we've lost them, though? I mean, look, there's a whole generation of people in this country who know absolutely nothing about unions. In fact, I'll give you an example. A couple of months ago, I was in California speaking at a Teamster event. And, the night before in the hot tub, I was kind of relaxing, and there was a woman and her mother in the hot tub, and we were just talking, hey, why are you here? And I said, I'm here to give a speech to the Teamsters. And the girl, who's like 30 years old, looks at me and goes, what's that? And her mother looked at her, you don't know what the Teamsters Union is? And she's like, no. And, it turns out this girl, her mother told the story of her uncle was a union organizer for the rubber workers in Akron in the 30s, one of the most militant unions in the country at the time.
Yep.
And that legacy had been lost just in their family, let alone the whole generation that this young woman was a part of. And it just set me back and said, we've lost a whole generation to the idea of an injury to one being an injury to all, or fair day's work for a fair day's pay.
Rick, I firmly disagree. I mean, I spent a lot of time going to Bernie rallies in 2016.
Okay.
And by and far, I was like the oldest guy there, or oldest person there in a lot of those. I mean, there are a lot of young people at those rallies, and those people really wanted protections of a union. They really wanted a union contract. They really wanted union jobs. So that's out there, and
no, I hope you're right.
Out there. There are a lot of people who really believe that the trade union movement and a rejuvenized union movement is really what's needed for young people. And you're right. We haven't done as good a job as we should be on educating young people about trade unions, but that's partially all about the corporate agenda, trying to eradicate unions from the textbooks and trying to eradicate unions from what is taught. And thankfully, there are good militant teachers unions out there that aren't allowing that to be happening, so that in Oklahoma and West Virginia and other states, the teachers are really leading the fight because they're being super exploited right now themselves.
Yep. No, and this is my problem. This is my problem, Gene. It took them a decade of being hammered over the head and mistreated. And, you look at the deplorable conditions. I talked to a number of teachers from Oklahoma while they were on strike, and the conditions that they had to toil under. Teachers going in a month before school to go through hundreds of desks just to find the 25 or 30 they needed that had feet on them and that weren't broken, or all this stuff. It took them a decade to speak up, though. I mean, this is one of those moments where, how bad does it have to get before you finally go, enough is enough?
Well, enough is enough now, and that's why they're going out on strike.
Right.
There are 50,000 teachers in L.A. ready to go out on strike as we speak. So the trade union movement has militancy left in it, and there are a lot of people pushing militant trade union positions in the U.S. And I'm sorry the Teamsters haven't joined the fray on that. I'm just sorry that the Hoffa administration continues to do this. Continues to try to impose inferior contracts, because instead of trying to mobilize their members, they're trying to organize the boss, and that's wrong.
Yeah, but here, at the end of this, I keep looking at these attacks on labor. Janus, I look at, the Epic Systems cases, which I think should be something front and center that every working person has to know, that, now the boss can impose mandatory forced arbitration on you, and you have no say about it unless you have a union contract, obviously. I'm hoping that message gets out, and I'm hoping that we get a much more militant union, and look, having to fight the same kind of fights we fought in the 20s and 30s all over again.
Rick, I mean, when has it not been tough on working people? We've overcome a lot much more than this.
True.
And this speaks to the issue. We just got to get back in there and fight. And you look at young people now. I mean, the level of impoverization from student loans for jobs that never materialized. I mean, there's real fight out there amongst young people. It just has to be harnessed and moved, and there has to be leadership to it. And we'll find that. And then there are people who are working in all kinds of precarious jobs under all kinds of new situations, Uber, Lyft, all that kind of stuff. And we've got to keep on pushing and fighting and doing the things the labor movement has always been doing, not knuckling under to two-tier wage schemes and things to appease the boss. That isn't going to get it done. Never has. No,
you're absolutely right. And you go back and you look at the last 30 years or so, and it's been that. I mean, try being this business friendly kind of unionism. This, I have building trades friends who tell me there's not a bit of sunlight between their interest and the employer's interest, and I wholeheartedly disagree. But there is that mentality.
Well, and then you get the trade unions, the crafts, fighting against things like the pipeline in South Dakota. Because it's going to provide jobs for a couple of years, but it's going to undermine the environment. And there's no fight for a just transition for people, so that we can both have jobs and a decent environment. So that the question is posed as, we can only have one or the other, and that's nonsense. There are unions all around the world fighting for decent environment and for decent jobs at the same time. But our craft unions just tend to be very conservative.
Yeah, but that's nothing new. I mean, this is going back to, fighting the original sins of the AFL and the CIO unions.
Oh, I agree. But, this is an old fight that has to be joined. And we're going to lose this fight if we wind up forsaking the environment. Young people want a safe place to live. It's just like football players now, all people are saying, I don't want to have brain injuries and be dead at age 50 because I don't have decent health and safety conditions on my job. We're seeing that more and more about young people. They're not willing to make that trade-off, for a couple of years of a good job, and then they wind up having to, compromise their health and their safety and their welfare.
No, I look at, over the last several years, I had spent a lot of time with the mine workers as they were fighting to hold on to, first their health care and then their pensions, and still now their pensions. And I remember going to a couple of rallies in Charleston and Fairmont, West Virginia, and you would see these guys who were, my age and younger, who are they're all bent over, their bodies are broken, they're suffering from black lung. They're almost on their last legs, and it was just what you said. They gave up a huge portion of their life so that they could support their families. And there's got to be a better way than ending up where those poor guys ended up.
Well, I mean, this is the reality of our fight. We have to have a trade union movement that is both militant and smart and knows how to organize people. That ain't happening with two-tier wage systems or compromising people's environment. We've got to have a trade union movement that represents our class, working people, and not some nonsense that sells out people.
Do you think that's an argument that's viable today when you start talking about class? Because every time I bring it up, because I don't say middle class, I say working class. But every time I say that, someone, no, that's you're just classist, and I'm going, yeah, because there are two classes in this country. There's the wealthy, the elites, the Brett Kavanaughs of the world, and then there's the rest of us who have to get up and put our pants on and go to work every day.
I mean, it's not classism; it's reality.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to face reality, that's your business. But I mean, working people have to be aware of that. That's the history of working people.
Now, you've been doing this a long time. You've been doing this a while. Do you have hope for the future? I mean, because I have a lot of.
I have tremendous hope for the future. I look what's going on in England with the Labour Party and how Corbyn and Momentum have changed the whole discussion in England and have renewed the Labour Party and the Labour movement. I look at Unifor in Canada, which has now occupied its third plant and stopped the 2-year lockout of its members in Gander, Newfoundland. So there's a lot going on to be hopeful. I see what's going on in Europe, and we just have to be willing to be more militant and engage in more struggle. Knuckling under never got it done.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. And look, because I'm actually hopeful. I mean, I see all of the attacks, and I see more obviously coming on, on what has been, and I'm actually hopeful of what the future is going to bring, because I don't know what the future is going to look like. And obviously the kind of if we have collective bargaining rights or where things go, still kind of up in the air. But I think people have had enough already. At least I hope so. I mean, we've almost had a lost decade for most working people. And you look at the polling, you look at the statistics of the kind of struggle that people are going through. At some point, you just say enough is enough, I think.
Well, and you look at all the pressure that was put on Amazon over the last couple of years, right? And now they're accepting a $15 minimum wage. I mean, I don't know enough about Amazon to know whether that's real or not. I mean, they've made a lot of publicity in the last week about doing that. But geez, that's more than the Teamsters are negotiating for their package handlers. There's something wrong there. The Teamsters don't seem to have the message here.
Yeah, well, and I heard that all weekend.
Yep, exactly. I mean, people are thinking as $15 is the floor. Why don't you at least negotiate a contract that gets people to that floor?
I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you.
UPS's profits can certainly afford that.
No, absolutely. And again, as I said, I've been hearing it all weekend long from UPS members who are saying, look, hey, there's something wrong here. And the hope is that they take it back and they use their power of membership and they push. And well, if it means change, that's what it means. The last question I've got for you, though, and I want to go back to this 2-tier wage system for a second. It seems like a lot of unions are finally getting away from them. Are trying to push. I know the UAW was pushing to get rid of them. Do you see a point where it's back out of vogue and they stop? Do you see any point in that?
I do, because it splits the membership in a way that divides the union and kills union bargaining power. And I think unions have seen that. At least most unions have seen it. I think it's encouraging that a big union like the UAW is moving away from that. Our union has always been opposed to it. We've never willingly accepted two-tier contracts. There have been some times where, we haven't been strong enough to resist it, but in most situations, we've not accepted two-tier agreements because they're wrong. It's a wrong division between people. Two people performing the same work deserve to be compensated equally.
I am right there with you, Gene. I appreciate you taking a little time for me, sharing some of your experience and your wealth of knowledge. I'd love to talk to you again some point.
Okay, no problem, Rick. It's been a pleasure. I enjoyed being with you.
Good stuff. Thank you so much, Gene Elk. He's the organizing director there with UE. You can check out their website. We'll get links out so people can take a look at what they do. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Share some thoughts there. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. For working people. Come to talk.
Everything's raising but the wages. Everything's raising but the wages.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1871. That was the day that the Great Chicago Fire began. The fire started in a barn on the property of Patrick and Catherine O'Leary. Legend pins the blame for starting the fire on a cow. Whatever the cause, the fire spread quickly throughout the city's wooden houses. For 2 days, the uncontrollable fire raged, destroying everything in its path. In the wake of its devastation, nearly 300 people died, and 100,000 families had their homes destroyed. One person who lost her business in the fire was renowned labor leader Mother Jones. In her autobiography, she wrote about the fire destroying her dress shop, saying, quote, "The Great Chicago Fire burned up our establishment and everything that we had. The fire made thousands homeless. We stayed all night and the next day without food on the lakefront, often going into the lake to keep cool. Millions of dollars were raised by the Chicago Relief and Aid Society to help those who needed help to rebuild. While the society did provide significant aid, treatment varied along class lines. To get assistance, the working class had to prove themselves worthy with personal references. Middle-class applicants for aid were more likely to be quickly approved to get money to rebuild. Working-class people had to wade through long approval processes. Some never received that approval. The experience galvanized some members of the working class to organize for change. One of them was Mother Jones. She wrote, "From the time of the Chicago Fire, I became more and more engrossed in the labor struggle, and I decided to take an active part in the efforts of working people to better the conditions under which they worked and lived." Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
So that's the question. Do we know who the enemies are? I watched Donald Trump today say, how wonderful, what a good man Kavanaugh was, and looked at Lisa McCarthy and said, she's going to pay. Said, well, she's going to pay. Also, he went on to say that Susan Collins, she's popular right now, according to Donald. I think Collins is so popular right now for what she did. And the question is, where is he looking for all this popularity? Because the people that I know are trying to figure out how to get someone to Maine to run against her and send her down the road. In fact, as I said the other day, we need more women in the U.S. Senate who are not Susan Collins. And someone who has decided that, hey, maybe she could throw her hat back into the ring. She ran for governor in Maine several years back, also a vice presidential candidate in 2004. Could Pat LaMarche come out of semi-retirement back to the political world there in the great state of Maine? I don't know. Let's find out. Pat, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks for giving me a call.
So what's the story? First, Susan Collins, popular? Just like Donald Trump said, she popular?
I'm sure she's trending. I'm sure she's trending really high, because when people say Susan Collins sucks, that hits the generators that say whether or not a name has been used recently. Take Susan Collins out of the Senate. That probably helped her trending numbers. I am absolutely sure that there are a lot of white guys in Maine, there are certainly plenty of them, who are finally saying, that rhino, she finally did something right. It was about time that rhino, kicked the butt that we always wanted her to. And for years and years and years and years and years, Republicans of Maine have trashed her. And so now all of a sudden she's their fair-haired girl. I think that there probably are a bunch of people in Maine that like her better than they did a week ago. They didn't get Paul LePage by accident. So unfortunately for the whole country, there are a lot of people who like the new, hey, we can be a jerk and be proud of it.
No, and
phase of the United States,
and lay it out. Now, do you buy her defense that she believed Dr. Ford, but she just didn't believe that it was him. She was assaulted. Sure, maybe something happened, but it just wasn't him, because all those white teenagers look alike.
It's immaterial what she said. It's completely immaterial. It's inconsequential. It doesn't matter, because this decision on how she was going to vote was a fait accompli a long time ago. I actually know Susan Collins very well. Like everybody says this. I know Susan. She's a really nice person. On the micro level, she's fab. On the macro level, she sucks. But I used to work with her. We both worked at Husson College back when it was Husson College, and I was a teacher at the New England School of Communications. But she always voted against her party when the party didn't need her, because it was this legitimacy they were lending to this falsehood of her being a moderate. So, when they were going to win by 3 votes, they said, "Oh, Susan, go ahead." Same thing with Olympia Snowe, who was a senator at the same time and then preceded her. We can spare you on this one. Go ahead and vote against us so your street cred goes up. And it's unfortunate because a lot of people fell for it, but there was no way that she was going to, and maybe that's what they did for Murkowski this time, although now the Republicans are talking about censuring Murkowski. Maybe that's what they did one of you can defect right now, and Flake, we're not going to negotiate with Flake because he's already leaving us. So one of you girls can do the right thing, and one of you girls needs to do the wrong thing. And then we'll still win, and everybody will think, wow, there's this revolution in the Senate. Well, what people are forgetting is that Mitch McConnell, the human living troll, changed the rules so that it should have been 60 senators in order to approve this abuser.
Yeah.
And he changed it so that I've been doing a lot of math on this. I'm actually writing a book right now about the failure of representative democracy. And I've been doing a lot of math today. The Kamala Harris won but with about 70-something% of the vote, and or 56% of the vote, and 74% of the people voted. So she got almost 7 million votes to be a United States senator, right? Mitch McConnell got in the 40% of 40%. So he got about 800,000 votes. But Mitch McConnell, who not only changed the rules for the 60-40 stuff to 50-50, he also has 800,000 people that voted for him versus Kamala Harris's 7 million.
Yeah, well, that's just that's the flaw of our system. It's the the flaw of the Senate system of equal representation across all the states, regardless of how big or small you are. But you said that McConnell broke the rule. Conservatives throw back right at me though, Pat, that it was Harry Reid first. He broke it first, so he set the precedent.
Oh, I love this. Harry Reid is so bad. Let's do it too. There is absolutely no ethical high ground here. You guys, like I can't believe this. Clinton was such a pig. Let us have pigs. I mean, it's just so amazing that they actually think that throwing up what they used to say was our dirty laundry justifies their dirty laundry instead of them actually being better than somebody. And trust me, I didn't vote for Bill Clinton, right? So I'm that redheaded stepchild no one wants to claim. I'm the liberal who's not a Democrat. So when people, regurgitate some garbage at me about Hillary Clinton, I'm like, whoa, I don't own Hillary Clinton. You own somebody else. I own Hillary Clinton, but you still can't make me think like you. You still will never make me a Republican, at least not the kind of Republican leadership. I know countless wonderful Republicans. Some of them swallowing pretty hard right now, pretty horrified by what the Republican leadership is doing. But this is all Republican leadership. This is all the Paul Ryans and the Mitch McConnells of the world. And Donald Trump didn't make them evil.
No.
Donald Trump is the result of their evil.
Yep. No, he just gave him gave him the cover to be able to do what they would naturally do anyway.
Right, absolutely. And, I was protesting. Well, I wasn't protesting. I was panhandling one time outside of Paul Ryan's office in Janesville, Wisconsin, because I was trying to get a hold of him. I was trying to get his attention. We had spent about 4 years trying to get him to understand that there was a bill before the Congress to change the definition of homelessness so that we could actually have an accurate count. And his staff called the cops on me. A chubby middle-aged lady standing in front of his office, panhandling, I had a sign that said, "Will you help the homeless?" Just trying to get his attention. And they called the cops. Cops came up. They wanted my ID. I said, "What's your probable cause?" Would I have said that if I'd been a black man? No.
They'd have probably shot you.
Right? Yeah. So he says, "Well, if you got nothing to hide," well, eventually I gave him my ID. And he says, "Well, you're in front of a congressman's office." I said, "Well, actually, that's why I'm here." And then he starts insulting my sign. "Did you make that sign?" That's not much of a sign. You're dissing my sign. The Speaker of the House should not call the cops on the people who are trying to protect the homeless.
Well, come on. You were blocking the sidewalk, or you were blocking the view.
I might have blocked the view. I might have been too attractive for the rest of the view.
Okay.
I went to mail a card to my family member who I love in Janesville, Wisconsin, just to say, "Hey, I'm out here. I'm having fun. Miss you." And I had to wipe the cobwebs off the mailbox. It wasn't like I was anything more than just a person trying to make Janesville downtown maybe a little more active.
Yeah. Well, especially since all the jobs left.
Right.
No, it's a horrible.
I've been listening to your show all night. It's heartbreaking what's going on in this country, and it's heartbreaking the way the incredibly low unemployment rate. The numbers can be so manipulated, and that's really what I was sort of proving to myself today while I was doing the math on Kamala Harris's votes versus, Mitch McConnell's votes, is the United States Senate wasn't even elected until the 17th Amendment said the United States senators have to be directly elected. They were just appointed.
Right.
It was the aristocracy. So when Donald Trump said Kavanaugh was born for this job, which were his exact words, Kavanaugh was born to be on the Supreme Court, he was articulating the exact point of the United States Senate, which is aristocrat. Make sure you preserve the wealth class. And so when he said that, he meant it.
Yeah.
If somebody says something, just trust them. Take them at their word.
Yeah, absolutely. No,
he meant it.
And look, as I said at the beginning, I've had this feeling in my stomach all day, like evil won. Like, the elite,
evil did win.
The elite who are entitled, who feel they're entitled to this. And Kavanaugh, if you watched his testimony, felt very much that he was entitled to this. He had busted his butt by grandfather getting him legacy at Yale. He was entitled to that. And how dare, a handful of Democrats have the audacity to question his destiny. And I've just been struggling with that today.
Yeah. Well, Blasey Ford still can't go home. Dr. Blasey Ford still can't go home. She has, you guys, can't you just admit you won and let this woman go home?
Yeah.
You still have to give her death threats? These people aren't even nice sore winners. You know, they can't even just. And I went to Boston College, a college full of Kavanaughs. And when my daughter said she wanted to look at Boston College, my heart sank because in the 70s and 80s, it was not a place to send your daughters. It was a place of predatory males. I'm sure Boston College doesn't want me telling anybody that, but that's the role of these elite schools. Is these guys go, they're the same jerks they were when they, and you know, as part of our culture about sexuality, you know, why can't people who want to have sex just have sex without a whole pile of guilt? And then maybe everybody out there who's, I mean, what are they called? The incels now? These guys who get to be violent because they can't get laid?
Yeah.
That's Brett Kavanaugh. That's Brett Kavanaugh in space.
Well,
But
he did
back
say
in
that he
the
was a
day-
virgin for a very long time, and that, you know,
you know, I watched his wife while he was saying that, and I'm like, she wishes he still was. That is one woman in this country right now wishes that he still was. You know, and to say I'm a virgin so I can't sexually assault someone, to say I can't violently, but even if let's just take that out of it. Just say poor Blasey Ford still has her life and her privacy and her freedom. The way that man reacted, he has no right to judge someone else for the death penalty.
yeah. No, and
You
that's
know,
the scary
and-
thing.
Right. And so I look at Susan Collins. I now live in central Pennsylvania. My children live in Maine. My grandchildren live in Maine. I would like to protect them from this draconian leadership that has taken over in Maine.
So are you moving back to Maine?
I tell you, we're looking at property. You know, I need a tiny little house from which I can have. The place I live in, Carlisle, is perfect because I'm a commuting distance from the Senate, right? So I'd have a while you're in session house, and then represent the people of Maine, who I dearly love. I absolutely dearly love the people. Some of them very much so because they're my grandchildren, but I love everybody else's grandchildren too. And, I don't have the big fancy connections that other people have. I got a lot of experience running for office, but I really think that what we need now is someone who actually knows people. Not people who know people, but people who know people. People who know how hard it is to feed your family when you've got a crappy job. And right now, even if they're saying, well, there are people making $30,000 a year, that's still a crappy job if you're trying to raise your family.
Yep.
You got a mortgage, health insurance, for the love of God, right? So I don't know. It's interesting. Like some Democratic women have come out of the woodwork. They want to take on Susan Collins. If somebody really good runs, then I won't feel the need to. I hope that we get some information on that stuff pretty soon, because if I'm going to do something like that, I'm going to have to make some changes pretty quick. I'm looking into exploratory committees and what the laws are for that, because federal campaigns are different from state campaigns.
Right.
So it's interesting. I mean, when I ran for vice president of the United States, I had to deal with the FEC for a federal campaign, because that was a federal campaign. But it's interesting, and I'm interested in talking to other people who want to talk about it. It's only 2018. The other thing is I would not run as a Democrat, because I'll never be a Democrat again, not since Bill Clinton took 271,000 kids off Social Security, which means I've run as an independent. Maine already has an independent senator, Senator Angus King, and a history of independent leaders. So, and of course, Bernie's only a couple of states away. But that means that I'd have to build an organization. And so, yeah, I've heard from a lot of people up there who are ready to work. I've heard from a lot of people all across the country who are ready to work. So I'm seriously, I am not going to allow Susan Collins to run again for United States Senate without a real firebrand taking her on. And I used to think if I just swear enough on Facebook, I'll never be able to run for office again. I'll just say god-awful, horrible things, and it won't be possible. And then came Paul LePage. And then came Donald Trump. And I haven't been able to think of a swear word bad enough to disqualify me from their league.
Yeah, I'm thinking that through. Yeah,
I mean, they put the whole "I'm a disgusting pig, don't you want to vote for me" thing. Like that's the pinnacle of how you can run for office now. So I mean, I would actually clean up my act, although it's probably going to hurt me.
Well,
right?
There is that. What do you think of the Susan Rice's name has been thrown around a lot? What do you think of her?
Well, people say, oh, it's going to be Benghazi. She's going to get hit with the Benghazi thing. I think the Democrats are cowards, and I think they need to stop being cowardly. If she's really got it going on, there's already like $3 million raised for the opponent, right? And there's all of this. The reason the Democrats keep losing is because they don't have the courage to draw a line in the sand and then take no prisoners to defend it, right? If you could put in your mind the person without health insurance is your own child, if you could do that for 5 minutes, your own mother, if you could put in mind the fact that that person whose Social Security is $650 a month, and now we have this rapidly growing homeless population of the elderly, if you could say that's my grandma, you'd draw a line in the sand and you'd defend it.
Yeah.
But the Democrats are like, nah, I got my job. I've been working in the Senate office building for like 35 years. Now I'm going to run, or I was in the Obama administration. Oh, okay, I'll cede this point or I'll cede that point. I wouldn't have run for vice president of the United States if I hadn't heard John Kerry say a couple of anti-choice judges are going to be okay. I was driving to work. I was a morning disc jockey. It was about 3 a.m., 4 a.m. I was driving to work, and I heard on the BBC, they ran a clip of John Kerry, who was then the presidential candidate, saying, a couple of anti-choice judges will be okay. Almost went off the road. The anti-choice people have a candidate, and they don't believe you when you mean it, John Kerry. So who's going to stick up for the women who needed choice? If the Democrats halfway through the election were already caving in.
Well, that's what, like Dick Cheney said, that's what they do. They're Democrats. That's what they do. They cave in.
Yeah. You got to have the guts to fight as hard as your constituent who can't get anywhere. When you're a mom of a sick kid and you've got to go to work that day and leave your sick kid home alone and hope for a break every hour and a half so you can call home and make sure the kid's okay, if you can fight as hard as your constituent, you will always win. And that's what those reptiles in the Republican leadership have taught us. They don't care if they're fighting to like chain and cage children. They fight for it like it's important.
Yep.
And they're disgusting and they're abhorrent and they should lose. And we need some backbone to fight it.
And that's why when I first heard of someone running against Susan Collins, I'm going, Pat LaMarche is the person who should be running. Get her back up to Maine, and we've got to get her on to talk about it. So how do we throw her out? Because like as I've been saying, we need more women in the Senate, just not Susan Collins.
Mm-hmm. That's a perfect line, by the way. It's the truth. There's not a truer word. Klobuchar, I don't even know if I pronounce her name right. She's fabulous. There are some fabulous women in Congress, and I think for the longest time, it was like, well, at least it's a woman. Well, that don't fly. That don't fly. It ain't okay if the woman is like the screw in the jail who just sold out the rest of you. Susan Collins is like the one who thinks that the jailhouse guards actually like her. That the jailhouse guards actually think she's one of them. No, at the end of the day, you're still just a girl. And those guys, those boys running the Senate, they got no respect for her.
No.
And her billionaire husband, who does work for the Russians, he's got no respect for her.
So last question, 30 seconds. How do we get you in?
I think about a whole pile of people got to contact me and tell me that they're willing to work on it. And somebody who knows the FEC laws now, because I don't know them well enough. That'd be a good start.
There you go. Good stuff, Pat. It was great talking with you. Again, we're going to get you back and keep this up.
Okay. Thanks, Rick.
Thanks, Pat. Appreciate it. Pat LaMarche. Hey, we need a draft LaMarche campaign. Quick break. Right back.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
Listen, can you hear it? Listen to the eerie sound of silence from the trumpeteers and congressional Republicans who so loudly cheered themselves just a year ago for bestowing $1 trillion tax giveaway on corporate elites. They told us they did it not for the rich, but to help the middle class and poor families. How would enriching the already rich benefit the rest of us? Trickle-down economics 101, said Trump and company, explaining that giving more money to elites would spark, quote, an immediate jump in wage growth, because CEOs would use their bonanza to reward workers for their productivity. The White House even got specific, declaring that average pay would jump as much as $9,000 per person. But here we are in the thick of the 2018 congressional elections, and shh, silence. Not a single lawmaker who voted for this grand ideological promise is mentioning it, much less running ads touting their role and hammering the plan into law. Why so shy? Because their trickle-down giveaway was a crude hoax from the start. CEOs spent the GOP's $1 trillion boondoggle on lifting their own exorbitant pay. Moneyed elites got the gold mine, working families got the shaft. Far from a $9,000 income boost, the workaday majority of Americans now find that their hourly earnings are lower than a year ago. But who cares? Being a trumpeter Republican means never admitting your lies and never apologizing. Steve Mnuchin, a former Wall Street banker who's now the Treasury Secretary, is a perfect example of a blasé, ethically challenged Trump huckster. He recently shrugged off the failure of the bloated tax cut to raise working people's income. Wages are going up on some people, he declared disingenuously. This is Jim Hightower saying, yeah, for multimillionaires like him. Yet he wonders why most Americans despise him and his ilk.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
New CNN poll out finds 51% of us disapprove or oppose Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation. Never mind what the people say. 41% they support him. Interestingly enough, all told, 52% of the country believes Dr. Ford, believes all of the women, actually, who accused Kavanaugh of sexual misconduct. 38% believe him over the women. And one of the questions that keeps coming back to me is, what does it take? Why is it that especially white women haven't really believed Dr. Ford? Is it because evidently less than half of white women voters believed her? And you look at this Quinnipiac poll that was released on Monday that 46% of white women believe Ford's accusation, 43% believe Judge Kavanaugh's denial, 11% are undecided. And the question is is this why is it this way? Is it because you just don't believe her? Does it have to do with you didn't believe her testimony? Is it that maybe you're afraid to admit your own vulnerabilities, internalized sexism? Who knows? Or is it just pure loyalty to the Republican Party, blind faith loyalty? Is that what it is? Maybe here to share some thoughts on just how crazy this whole thing has gotten, and how we move forward with this. I've asked our good friend Propane Jane to come talk with us. Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back.
So help me through this, because I'm seeing these things.
Those are really depressing statistics, man.
It is. And it's one of these things where, I watched both, I have no vested interest one way or another in that hearing, but I watched both of those people give their presentation, pour her heart out to him, whatever the hell that was. And I found her to be very credible, very believable, and honest. She said what she knew. It was honest about what she had forgotten or didn't remember. It just seemed to me that if you watched it, and maybe it's the problem, maybe everyone didn't, but if you watched it, I don't know how you couldn't believe her.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I tweeted out in the last couple of days was also the statistic that I believe it was in that same poll, something like 83% of Black voters believed Dr. Ford.
Right.
And around 66% of Latino voters believe Dr. Ford. So there's not only this gender gap, there's also an ethnic gap and a racial gap. So I think it's a very interesting question, and I think you're raising both sides of the issue. I mean, on the one hand, there's this sort of Stockholm syndrome idea that the women are not identifying with their womanhood or the person who is the accuser in this situation, that they're actually identifying with the male figure in the situation. I think it's partly that, but then it's also the partisanship. And I do think that, the loyalty to the Republican Party also still has those elements of Stockholm Syndrome weaved in, right? Because this is the party that is not coming out in any way in support of reauthorizing the Violence Against Women's Act. They're not moving any ground on the Equal Pay Act. They're doing all sorts of things that are anti-woman in terms of policy. So I think even the loyalty to the Republican Party at this point for those women is very questionable, and it makes you really wonder where they stand in terms of their own independence and self-determination, that they're voting for a party that continually is oppressing them.
Yeah, and the other part of it is, you throw policy in there, and you look at the abortion issue, of which, I'm sure that's part of it, and they don't really care, because what I've realized is there are a lot of people who don't care about morals or values or any of that. Look, we got Trump in the White House, so it's all about political outcome. It's all about, we want to destroy Roe, and whatever path we have to get there, the ends justify the means.
Yeah, totally. And I think that, again, that in and of itself is very anti-woman, because as we've talked about in terms of the abortion debate or the contraception debate, whether people want to admit it or not, is that in many cases abortions are medically necessary procedures. In a lot of cases, contraception is a medically necessary medication that people need to take.
Right.
And so the idea that you can just make this blanket policy for everybody, a one-size-fits-all, that's based on, again, their theocratic ideals, that's not going to work in practice, because that's just not how it works in reality, in the real world. So, I think that, yes, that's the end that they would like to get to. But along the way, we've already seen them not only chipping away at rights that have been won, but also not moving forward in terms of family leave and maternity leave and health care and all of these things that women actually need better policy for. We already are decades behind the rest of the industrialized world in terms of just our policies towards women. We're not number one in terms of the advancement of women.
We're probably number one in the other direction.
And, we allegedly fought these wars over in Afghanistan and Iraq because, we didn't like the way the Taliban and, all of these different people were treating their women.
Oh, you bought that?
I was just saying, so to speak, and I'm holding up scare quotes. You just can't see me.
Okay, I'm going to say, well, someone bought that? I thought it was just over the oil and the lithium.
But this is the argument that, when you flip it on its head, those women in the Republican Party are actually, going all in for war and going all in for blowing other babies up, right, across the world because they're allegedly helping women, quote unquote.
Yeah, but you could also make the argument that Hillary was very hawkish too. And she, I don't think Hillary was really opposed to blowing people up either.
Well, I think that she was somebody who, in terms of her justification for going into these countries, in terms of her justification for, the advancement of women around the world, the human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights. That idea that, even when she was going over to Iraq and Afghanistan, that was what she was talking about when they were talking about nation building and they were talking about getting women into education. They were talking about the advancement of women as a means to stabilize and civilize the nation, because what you have is a patriarchal system where the men are running rampant and they're corrupt and they're violent. And this is what we have now in America. To bring it back to where we are today, is that when you have a society that is oppressive of women, that's oppressive of ethnic minorities, you also have this bellicosity and you have this arrogance and this entitlement and this corruption that goes along with that. And these people are allowing it to fester in America because the people who are doing it are white men. And there's a privilege associated with that and attached to that nobody else you can think of, not Hillary Clinton, not Barack Obama, could have gotten away with what they've gotten away with to this point. And it's because of those white women that you're talking about, and also white men. I mean, 62% of white men voted for Trump. And that's still where his approval lies with white men. It's around 60%.
Yeah.
So this is who we can see within the numbers who is getting off on this and who's supporting it. And you can clearly see the line of who's not supporting it and who wants to go out there and vote against it in November.
Does this mean I'm going to lose my white man card?
I think you may have already lost it just by talking to me.
No, but I look at this and look, I don't know about you, but I watched the clips of, and I talked about this at the beginning. I watched the clips of Kavanaugh, being sworn in by Roberts, and he's surrounded by his family, and maybe you'll join me in this, but I just got this ill feeling in the pit of my stomach that evil won. And look, I try and raise my kids, and I talked about this at the beginning. To do the right thing. If you follow the rules, there are consequences for actions. All of those very working class kind of ethical, things that we throw out and saddle our kids with, that I was saddled with, and and I actually internally believe.
Right.
But I watched, and I watched him being confirmed, and I'm going, the elite aren't held to the same rules that the rest of us are. And look, and we've talked about this for a while, I never thought he was going to be blocked. I always assumed he would take his place on the Supreme Court, because even he believed he was entitled to it.
Yeah.
So I'm struggling with that today. I'm struggling with that sense that the elite, the entitled, the evil, if you will, they always seem to win.
Yeah. And I think in the discussions that I have online, what has become most apparent to me over the last few years is that I think when you belong to a marginalized group, that's sort of always the world that you live in. Like, even from a very young age, you learn very early on that the house always wins, and that guy, that entitled, privileged, rich white guy, gets away with everything. And I think that's just sort of the narrative that I have sort of come to understand about the world, just based on how I've seen my people, my ancestors, be treated in this country. And so I think, in particular, at this moment, we are seeing that happening day after day after day after day. It's not something that's like this historical reference, and you got to think back to slavery, to like the last time it just ran rampant or something like that. I mean, it's happening right in front of you. And I think even if we talk about privilege a lot, but even if you are a white person, I think this is a moment where you understand that if you are not in this upper echelon, wealthy, elite, status, that even you are not entitled to this same level of, privilege and just ability to evade consequences for everything you do. And I think that is so disgusting to people, and it feels so unfair. And I think that is why the last couple of days, the last couple of weeks even though we knew, like, okay, this is probably going to happen, there's really no chance that it's not going to happen. I think just the realization of that sinking in and just seeing it day after day, it feels very oppressed. That's what I told a friend this weekend. I just feel oppressed over the last couple of days.
Yeah, and the sad reality is this guy's going to be on the court for the next 40 years. So that feeling is going to be there every time a 5-4 decision comes down, taking another right away or eroding a little bit of the progress of the 20th century or ripping another building block out of the middle class and a prosperous working class away from us. That memory is going to be there, that this guy should not be in one of those robes on that bench.
Yeah, and I think that this is a moment where we have to decide how much stomach do we have to just lay down and accept what has happened over the last, going to be 2 years by the time we get to January. What is our appetite? And we were faced with this in, 2006. And we had an opportunity at that time to go, okay, we think all of these war crimes happened. We know that, the election, that we were defrauded in many ways. And then we lost this appetite and this fighting spirit. And so many of the things that were detrimental just remained in place, and we're still trying to undo, right? And then they're doing more damage on top of that. So I think with Kavanaugh, I think with Trump, I think with everything that they've instituted or tried to roll backwards, we have to really steel ourselves and say, okay, hey, we still have the opportunity to follow up on that. Kavanaugh did perjure himself. We do have standards here. He doesn't have to stay there for the rest of his life. We can actually hold this man accountable. We don't have to fall for the abuse and the oppression and the white patriarchy and all of these things that we're saying we're so disgusted by. We can actually fight back.
Yeah, but that's a major heavy lift. I mean, you're talking 67 senators to impeach. We could only get 50 to get him on the court.
Yeah, but if this is what people want to see, right? I mean, when we talk about, what should the Democratic Party stand for and where are these boundaries, and we say, okay, well, we don't want to be weak. We kind of talk out of both sides of our mouth where we want to do these really drastic things and we want to make really drastic progress to catch up. But then at the same time, we sort of limit ourselves in terms of how far can we go? Can we get a Beto in all these districts, and all these states across the nation? Why can't we recruit candidates that are really going to go out there and say some things that, we can get some of these 80-year-olds out of the Senate, I mean, we need to start prying some of these people out of there, and we just, I think, have to have the courage to do it.
So what do you do with Joe Manchin? What do you do with Phil Bredston from Tennessee? I mean, because right now the talk now is I think it was Move On who said they're pulling all of their digital money from them, from both the guy from Tennessee and from West Virginia. No money for them. But if you lose them, the Democrats don't control the Senate. I mean, this is one of these kind of trade-off moments where, look, I'm with you. I want to be as militant as possible. I want a Beto in every place. But what do you do in places like in West Virginia? Do you cede that seat to the Republicans in ideological purity, or do you take the fact that sometimes or most of the time, Joe Manchin's going to stab you in the back?
Yeah, I mean, I think the calculation that has traditionally been made is that you accept a Manchin and you accept a Heitkamp or a McCaskill or, all of these kind of purple, blue, mishmash, kind of red places, and we put them there and we hope that, yes, they will vote with us like 90% of the time and we prepare for them to kind of, stab us in the back. And I think when you are a marginalized person and you're looking at, police brutality, and you're looking at your, reproductive rights on the line, these people making these votes and intentionally aligning with, again, their constituents that are, to be honest, Republicans. I mean, ultimately, these are people who vote Republican. Or they vote this kind of blue dog Democrat because that person is very nebulous and doesn't really come down hard in terms of, like, the culture war issues. And so they can still vote for that person. I think in those states, that works for them.
Right.
And that's how they win elections. And I think that the people are speaking in those states and they're still electing that person despite knowing that, yes, they will vote with the Democrat however much of the time. And I think in those instances, some of those Republicans are actually smart enough to know that I'm getting actually better policy out of having this person be a Democrat, actually.
So,
I mean,
so to narrow that down, we're okay with Manchin and the guy from Tennessee.
I think you are because here's the thing about Manchin, that I appreciated in that moment. If you think back, this is feels like eons ago, but around the time right after Trump was inaugurated, there was this threat of a government shutdown, and the coal miners were raising holy hell because they were about to lose all these benefits. And ultimately, Joe Manchin, stood up and, held out legislation until something got put in there for his constituents. And in that instance, that is representative democracy. He is working for his constituents.
Right.
It's unfortunate that in the presidential election, they don't follow him and vote for his presidential candidate. But I can't, in a lot of ways, knock him for doing the job that his constituents send him to do.
Yeah. Now on the miner front, again, those were promised benefits, back, through the New Deal era, through the Truman era, that they guaranteed those men health insurance and
Right.
their pension going forward, that if they would go down into the earth and pull out this coal and suffer the shorter lives and the horrible diseases that come along with it, that they'd be taken care of. This was just a scenario of our government trying to renege on their promises. And you're right. I saw Manchin, met him in Charleston, West Virginia a couple of years ago at one of the big miner rallies, and they love him there. Me, not so much, but they love him.
Yeah. And I think that, or they know that a Republican in that seat isn't going to vote to keep those benefits.
And so why doesn't that translate into everything else then? I mean, I keep coming back to this.
I mean, exactly. But when you throw in the culture war and you use that, in a presidential election, I think that's why this Southern strategy is what it is.
Yeah.
That's why it has worked for as long as it has worked. And that's why the Republican Party continues to go back to it year after year after year after year.
So let me ask you this,
is why Putin capitalized on it too.
Yeah, but because there's a real good chance that the Democrats take back over the House. Are we okay with Nancy Pelosi as Speaker? I mean, again, here's somebody who's kind of they're not pursuing impeachment. I don't see her. I don't see a lot of things getting too far. I'm curious your thoughts on her.
My thoughts on Nancy Pelosi are that, number one, she is the most productive Speaker of the House in modern history. That's number one. All of the legislation that Barack Obama was able to get through despite GOP obstruction was also ushered through by Nancy Pelosi. She was a powerhouse to get Obamacare through. So that is all to her credit. Now, when we get back to representative democracy, she can say, slow walk it and, do that kind of game that they like to play and not try to sound too radical. But our responsibility as, if we're calling ourselves the base of the Democratic Party, is to lead these leaders in the direction that we want them to go. And if that's what we as voters have an appetite for, that is what we impress upon those representatives. And that's how we get that. If that's what we decide we
Right.
want.
Well, that's a good answer. I mean, it's the right answer, but is it reality?
I think it is reality.
Because
I
I remember going back to the Affordable Care Act. I mean, everybody I talked to, and maybe you saw this differently, but everybody I knew wanted at the minimum a public option, which was never really discussed. I mean, Medicare for All was never even allowed to be discussed, thanks to Max Backdoris. But still, the public option was never even allowed to be discussed.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue with the public option was more an issue of just the reality of the healthcare system. I mean, and I'm sort of biased on that issue because I'm speaking as a doctor in many ways. But I don't think a public option, in terms of the industry leaders that they were able to bring to the table at that time, the insurance companies, the pharmaceutical companies, I don't think that those players would have been on board for the policy because, again, they still wanted to make as much money as they could off of this. I don't think that you could have gotten them on board the way they were on board to reform their system with the public option. And I do think that was a situation where they really did go, what is the greatest good for the greatest number? They did a triage, and they went for the biggest step on the ladder they could take. And it was up to us, again, as the voters, to not leave them hanging over these petty, disagreements and purity and this, and that, and to stay and vote in 2010 and to vote in 2012 and to vote in 2014 and to keep our congressional majorities so that we could continue to build upon, make progress, right, as people call themselves progressives, to make progress going up the ladder each step. And we didn't do that as voters. We allowed the suppression to take over. We allowed the media to drown everything out with the Tea Party and all of that asinine propaganda messaging. And this is where we end up again. And we're still trying to dig ourselves out of a hole and not making the progress that we would like to make.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. Again, it was part of trying to get those insurance companies on board, of which I'm anti-insurance company. I think it's something we could do ourselves. We don't need them and their profits and their. But that's an argument for a whole nother day. I want to go back real quick before we wrap up to the beginning of this where we started, because I want to the idea that white women. Didn't believe her and, believes Kavanaugh. And does it come down to socioeconomics, do you think? I mean, because I'm looking at things and I'm going, does it, there are a lot of people who think, it doesn't matter because if you're of a certain wealth status, a board of care is going to be always available. You can travel because what will end up happening, and and I had this conversation the other day, is if they overturn Roe, it'll just revert back to the states, and some states it'll be legal, and some states it won't. And if you have the resources to make it to a state that does, well, then good for you. If not, sorry, you're SOL.
Yeah.
So economics, I think, plays into this overwhelmingly.
Yeah, I absolutely think it does, and I think that again, one of the major themes that I've been talking about is this idea that, let's sort of use like Edith Bunker. We'll just call her Edith Bunker. I'm not saying this is the exact replica.
I'm sure Gene Stapleton's going to be thrilled.
But, say you have a situation that, again, is this traditional conservative WASP, family household where the man, sits atop the household. It's a patriarchal situation.
King of his castle.
He's the king of the castle. He's the breadwinner. Maybe his job, is maybe he has a job in coal. Maybe he has a job in some industry that, is a Republican-leaning industry, right? And so not only is his employer saying vote Republican, their church is saying vote Republican, the husband is saying vote Republican at home. So, say this woman is entirely, say she doesn't work, maybe, or say, even if she does work, she doesn't make anywhere near as much money as the husband does. And so she needs his socioeconomic status for her own survival, okay? So the way that he is choosing to vote in many ways influences her vote. that's even beyond just sort of their ability to communicate about how they feel politically, et cetera, et cetera. And so, yes, if they have money, she could go get an abortion somewhere. But again, I think when you're talking about just bread and butter type things, like do you have basic, your basic needs met? Do you have food on your table? When you need to go to the doctor, are you able to go to the doctor? And if the man in their life is telling them that, hey, we need to vote this certain way so that the lifestyle we have can be maintained, that's a very powerful draw for that woman to go along with that man in her life who, because of the statistics, that 62% more than likely belongs to the Republican Party and votes that way.
Yep, I agree.
I mean,
and it's saddening to me. But we'll see how this continues to play out, and hopefully the anger will take us through to November as we rush through the finish line and at least take the House back. We need some accountability. But Jane, I appreciate the time. It's always a pleasure talking with you.
Absolutely. You have a great week.
You as well. Always enlightening, entertaining. Our good friend Propane Jane. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to the Rick Smith Show.
We have successfully completed negotiations.
The most important issues of the day. This is the
winner in Trump's new NAFTA trade deal. We don't typically see this. Two simultaneous Category 5s now spinning in the Pacific. The first ever container ship crosses the Arctic as sea ice hits new lows. Plus,
we've been quite pleasantly surprised and would encourage more of this technology into the grid.
Tesla's big battery in South Australia succeeding beyond all expectations.
All of those great expectations and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
I wish Rex Tillerson was still there. I never thought I'd be saying, where's the guy from Exxon?
This is your Green News Report.
Jesus, doesn't Chevron have someone who can step into that administration?
I'm gonna soak up the sun.
Okay, Desi Doyen, I was shocked to learn that big oil was the big winner in the new NAFTA deal.
Yeah, who could have thought? In the Trump administration's new trade deal with Mexico and Canada to replace NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, there is some good news. The agreement drops a provision called the Investor-State Dispute Settlement, which allows multinationals to sue sovereign governments for the loss of future profits from new policy changes like new pollution regulations.
So oil companies can't sue the U.S. if the U.S. decides they ever wish to start putting a carbon tax out, for example.
Well, not exactly. The bad news is that there's a carve-out for energy companies. According to financial journalist David Dayen in a recent broadcast, the fossil fuel carve-out, however, is limited to only current contracts.
It's essentially a hedge against the new incoming Mexican president from renationalizing the oil and gas sector. It definitely is a carve-out, but damages for expected future profits could not be recouped. Only concrete damages.
So there's that. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is taking its attack on public health to new levels this week, proposing or preparing to propose weakening regulations that protect the public from toxic mercury pollution from coal-fired power plants, weakening regulations that limit how much radiation you're allowed to be exposed to, and loosening more offshore drilling regulations. Meanwhile, the extremes of 2018 continue. Thanks to unusually warm ocean waters in the Pacific, Typhoon Walaka and Super Typhoon Kong Ray are the first two major typhoons to simultaneously achieve Category 5 intensity since 2005.
Kong Ray?
Kong Ray.
Okay.
Plus, Typhoon Walaka makes 2018 only the fourth season ever on record to see 8 or more major hurricanes by October 1st. That Pacific Ocean ocean warmth has also prompted NOAA to predict that we may see another El Nino hitting the U.S. in the coming months, and that could goose global temperatures and fuel even more extreme weather.
How many El Ninos are we going to have? It's like every year now we have another El Nino.
And you're right. It is unusual to have one this close to the last one, which was just 2 years ago. NASA announced this week that the Arctic sea ice minimum, which measures the extent of sea ice at the end of summer, was the 6th lowest ever recorded. The 12 lowest minimums have all occurred in the last 12 years.
Totally a coincidence.
The month of September also marked the passage of the first ever commercial container ship through the Arctic Ocean, made possible by the melting of Arctic ice. More container ships mean more pollution. But there is some good news. A new international agreement signed this week in Greenland now bans commercial fishing in much of the Arctic Ocean for at least the next 16 years. It protects vast areas that have opened up due to man-made global warming. It's intended to prevent, for now, the overfishing seen in other parts of the world, even as climate change causes major fish species to move farther north as the planet warms.
Has the U.S. signed on to that treaty?
Yes, it has.
What happened there? How did they miss that one? What's going on? Is Donald Trump okay?
Finally, remember that big battery that Tesla installed in South Australia?
I do, yes.
On that bet from CEO Elon Musk?
Yes.
Well, Tesla's big battery farm, it stores clean energy generated by a wind farm, and since going into service nearly a year ago, it has repeatedly stabilized the electric grid, preventing blackouts as the province's aging coal plants have broken down. ABC Australia reports that the battery farm is exceeding all expectations.
The naysayers said it was a waste of money, but this big battery is already playing a key role in stabilising the grid. And it's doing so with a speed, precision and agility that's never been seen before. Conventional generators can't match the way the battery makes small adjustments to power supply to keep the grid at the right frequency.
Australia energy market operators like the big battery so much, they're calling for more of them to be installed.
Oh, big coal and big natural gas are not going to be happy about that.
Nope.
For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Do you come from a land down under? Women go and men wonder. Can't you hear the thunder?
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check the website, thericksmithshow.com. So I spent the whole weekend watching the confirmation, watching all the nonsense around it, watching Mitch McConnell do his victory laps and his celebratory dances. The Saturday Night Live bit was, I think, kind of interesting. The locker room full, just like a big party. Kind of what it is. I mean, we've turned into this, the dueling frats, if you will. It's really just completely, screwed up. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on, what the weekend was and what we've got going on. Got our good friend Bob Ney, Talk Media News. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Sure, Rick.
So, did you watch the confirmation, all the handshaking and all the black slapping and all that?
Some of it. I mean, I caught. I wanted to be able to report today, but I can't say that I watched door to door like I did the actual confirmation hearings.
Yeah, I couldn't get this. I was watching saw a clip of Kavanaugh with his daughters, and they're doing the swearing in with Roberts, and I couldn't help but get this, as I talked about at the beginning, this feeling in the pit of my stomach that this is everything wrong about society, that the elite always seem to do just fine, and it's one of those moments where you teach your kids you got to lead a good, virtuous life, you can't screw up, and yet you look at this and you go, well, is all that just BS?
Well, I think that now that it's ended, of course, a 50-48 vote, and that in itself was orchestrated there was the canceling out of the vote. Lisa Murkowski was a no, but she wouldn't cast a no, so that Dane didn't come back from the wedding. None of that really mattered in a sense that it was one way or the other he was confirmed.
Right.
Period.
And there's no question of that.
That was done.
Once Manchin came out and said he's going to, he was voting for it, it was over.
Now, Manchin could have, in my opinion at least, living, close to West Virginia as I do, Manchin actually could have voted no and survived the election.
Yeah, I mean, last time I checked, he's up like 12, 15 points now, right?
What, 23?
Well, sure.
And he could have survived. Now, people say, well, yeah, but he would have thrown a lifeline to a dying candidate to cause him some grief. But, I mean, that's why it was a purely political vote.
Of course it was. But, here's the and this is the thing that I've got to grapple with now, because I've had these conversations, over the weekend with people who are going, I'm not supporting Joe Manchin. I'm not supporting the guy in Tennessee. Screw those people. They don't have our values. I'm going, whoa. Let's take a giant step backward. I'm still considering, maybe possibly the Democrats taking back the Senate. And if you throw the towel in on both of those, it no way happens. And look, I'm not a huge Manchin fan. He's backdoored, us a number of times. But still, you need that seat.
Well, I mean, if I were the Democratic side, I would also apply the theory to Manchin. Look, Mitch McConnell got a vote that he wanted out of Manchin, and then he turned around and said, but we're still going to campaign against him. So if you're on the Democratic side, you should say, okay, we didn't get the vote, but we're going to support him.
Yeah,
even if you didn't get the vote.
No, I'm with you. But, look, I mean, Manchin has just ticked off so many people for so long that it's just one of those things where you have this, look, I fully expect at some point him to flip, like Justice did and become a Republican. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? But any final reactions on the Kavanaugh thing? Does it now die down? Do you think, like McConnell thinks and hopes it will, or does this keep steam?
Well, that's my final. When you say any reaction, it's this happened and that happened and woulda, coulda, shoulda, and what people should have turned into months ago, and on and on and on. And we can look back at his demeanor and the fact that good friends said he lied about his use of alcohol. Now it's done. He's done. He's sworn in. So, final thought is that this energizes the progressive base. They're angry, and it energizes the conservative base. They're happy. Now, if you get energized and you're happy, you might tend to be satisfied and not necessarily go to the polls. If you're energized and you're angry, you probably will go to the polls. So both bases are energized, but I would say the progressive side has an up on everything because they're going to be angry about things. So it's all voter turnout is what it's going to be.
Right.
But I still think that vast, not vast, but the field of independence is up for grabs, and Republicans are having a problem with gender votes.
Do you think?
Yeah, they are. Yeah. So now, still, having said that, any false sense that this is over with, it's a blue wave, and it's all done, that's a good way for the Democratic side to lose.
Right.
This is about, as you know, this is about voter turnout.
No, absolutely. And one of the things that scares me, I don't know if you've seen the numbers, but the older you are, the more likely you are to vote, and the younger you are, the more likely you're not going to vote. And a lot of this blue wave talk is based on the younger, the largest generation coming out in big numbers and voting. And yet the polling on it, not so good.
Well, the Washington Post, which is not the bastion of a conservative paper, was very conservative on the election today. And normally they might not be that much, but they said it was close. And I think it is close. I don't believe that it's over with in the House. The Senate could roll, but let's face it, most likely won't. But it doesn't have to roll over as much as all it has to be is close.
Right.
And a lot of mischief can be caused to either side, So I think the House is close, but, there's still about a month left, and people have to play their cards right. But I think Kavanaugh's a factor, especially with the gender vote.
I got to think it is. I mean, at the end of it. At least you hope. But I'm more and more. I'm kind of surprised that there are women out there go, I just don't believe her. I mean, in fact, Susan Collins came out and said, don't believe her. Think she was assaulted. It just wasn't our guy. It was somebody else. It was a white guy looked just like him. They all look alike. Come on, that was supposed to be funny.
I got it.
Well. Yeah. Well, anyway, so I understand the White House is preparing for...
you should have said they were Republicans. They all look alike.
Okay.
Now, that would have been funnier.
That would have been funnier.
Right.
Oh, but because I'm sure back in high school he was one of the young Republicans.
I think so.
I do not doubt that. Anyway, I guess the White House is preparing for the House to get flipped because they're planning for an investigation right out of the gate, right?
Well, right. Everybody, they are preparing for it. They've been in denial. But, Rick, everybody talks about impeachment and impeachment.
Yeah.
But I think that the death by 1,000 cuts is going to be more into investigations versus impeachment. I'm not sure where Nancy Pelosi will be as speaker on the impeachment issue, to be honest with you. I don't think she's going to be as enthused as some others. But as far as the investigation side, there'll be a lot of enthusiasm for that. When something happens, let's look at the cabinet member. Which one was it that did all kinds of things and nobody did anything about it?
Scott Pruitt?
Yeah, Scott Pruitt. If the Democratic side was running the House, there undoubtedly would have been a definite look into it and who did what in the department and why aren't they servicing, the agency like they're supposed to. So I think that when those things happen to a White House, like Clinton's had the Whitewater, it really does suck the life out of the White House. You have to answer this, you have to find that, you have to go after and find material, and that will just frustrate this administration big time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of Pruitt. The pens come to mind. I mean, there's the phone booth, like the $40,000 phone booth, and then there's the, the pens. They were like $100 a piece for these pens they bought, or something like $130 a pen. It was some outrageous number for just a stupid pen, and all the travel and the mattress from Trump Tower and all this stuff. And look, you've also got the other guy, Ryan Zinke, who had $100,000 door put on or some nonsense. I mean, they spend without question, but hey, they're fiscal conservatives.
Right. So I mean, I think things like that would be looked into.
Just crazy, But here's the thing, and this is where I kind of come back to. I think you're right. There isn't going to be an impeachment. For me, the Democrats taking over the House is the only way I think the Mueller stuff gets out. Although today, Trump came out and said he wasn't going to fire Rosenstein. How much can we believe that?
Well, that's. He's balancing because he's going to fire Sessions election night.
Of course.
So, yeah, he's sparing one of them. I often, if he's not going to fire him, I often wonder what did they talk about or what terms did they come to that he didn't fire him? He's been all over Rosenstein. Unless Rosenstein kind of glorified him and made him feel, good.
Yeah, I don't know how you do that. You're so wonderful, Mr. Trump. You're supreme exalted leader.
You never know.
Oh, just crazy nuts. Let's look internationally. Evidently, the missing Saudi journalist, are they saying he was killed in the embassy?
Yes, and the Saudis, believe it or not, just that only for that day the cameras weren't working.
Oh, that's convenient.
Just for that day. Yeah, that's convenient. I mean, Saudi Arabia gets away with so much stuff under administration to administration. They really do, and it's because of their oil money.
Yep.
And they're brutal. I used to live in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah. They're absolutely brutal. They don't care. They do as they please. And this new, Crown Prince, he runs around and says, I'm letting women drive, but he's not really making reforms. And Canada spoke out. Canadians spoke out against him. Look what happened to all of the Canadians. So, I think possibly something could have happened.
So do we think he's dead? Do we know he's dead? Do we have, or is this, who knows?
No, they have no idea. He went in. His name is Khashoggi, Jamal Khashoggi. He worked for the Washington Post and other journalistic outlets, and the Saudis hated him because he was bad-mouthing them all the time. He's a Saudi. He was going to marry a Turkish woman, so he went into the embassy to file papers, fiancé papers. Never came out. She waited on him. The Saudi said, "Oh yeah, he came out right away." Well, he didn't. I mean, and then somebody said, "Well, let's look at the film," and they said, "Well, the cameras weren't working that day."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he went out the
And
back
that's where
door.
it ended.
He went out the back
And
door.
then
Didn't
somebody
really
else
want to get married.
Connected with Saudi Arabia said that he was hacked to pieces, is what they said.
Jeez. Now on Twitter all day today, there were a bunch of people who were upset that they even they put his family's name out there and some other and stuff. In fact, one of the New York Times folk, I think it was Friedman, who wrote in his piece something about he was somebody that he was a friend and someone who gave him information, and it's like hey, shut up already.
Right. Correct. Yeah, that's right.
Jeez. Also internationally, there's a UN panel on climate change, and it's not good.
Well, it's showing that this is so bad now and so out of control that something has to be done like now, urgent, immediate. And of course, the population of the Earth, and then the different toxins and things in the environment. I mean, I think that one could say, well, you can argue how we clean the place up, but we first have to recognize, of course, that it does need cleaned up.
Yep.
And there is something wrong.
Yeah, we got a guy running for governor here in Pennsylvania, a guy named Scott Wagner. He believes it's just because there are too many people, and the body heat of everyone, the collective body heat of all of us, has warmed the planet.
Scott Wagner, why is that name familiar?
He's running for governor here. He's the trash man. He's a rich guy, owns one of the.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I knew.
Extreme, way out fringe, right wing crazy, but still loaded and connected. But fortunately, running probably one of the worst campaigns I've ever seen. So I'm pretty happy about that. He's the guy who won't put out his tax returns because the unions will take his tax returns and go to all of his employees and say, look how much he's making and look how much you're not making. So he's not doing it because it'll make his employees jealous. I don't think you're supposed to say that. I know that's the truth. I know that's what, but I don't know that you're really supposed to say that if you're the guy at the top of the heap. Just kind of throwing that out there.
It has to be entertaining then. Yeah.
Oh, the guy's a blast. I mean, he's as crazy as a loon. He's Trump. He's baby Trump without the charisma or personality or the ability to Twitter. So he's just a lunatic. But it is what it is. And finally, have we found the vanishing Interpol head? Have we found him anywhere?
Yes, he's in Beijing. I love how all these countries say, no, we don't know where he's at. And then, yeah, we have him. He's here. Like Saudi Arabia and Khashoggi, and now head of Interpol. And the Chinese said, well, he had some corruption, but they also went after an actress over there. And I guess what's going on is that the regime in China is just really clamping down. And if you get anywhere near, a problem for them, then they've been, trying to get people like the actress and now head of Interpol.
Yeah, they disappear you.
Why would you, if it was legitimate, he was corrupt, they were after him, why would you even deny you have him?
Right.
They have him. Right.
They were hoping nobody would notice.
Right.
He just went on vacation one day and gone. Maybe he's in Pakistan where bin Laden was.
Right.
Just crazy. Crazy times we live in, Bob, and I fear it's only getting worse.
Well, it's different than anything I've seen, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, may you live in interesting times. There you go. Bob, appreciate the time, man.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick.
Good stuff. Our good friend Bob Ney, Talk Media News. I mean, seriously, it's just getting plain out there. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. Chances are you may never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, inspecting an elevator, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. You fascists are bound to lose.
Yes. In addition to Scott Pruitt, I mean, let's not forget about Ryan Zinke in the door, like I said. Nikki Haley in the drapes. I think she had like $60,000 in drapes. It's just some outrageous number. I hope the drapes open and close themselves. And you think about Trump's parade. He wanted to have the big parade. $30 million, they said that was going to cost. And in fact, exactly 1 year ago today, Mike Pence did that little whatever the hell that was at the Colts game. Remember, he showed up because, hey, Peyton Manning's jersey was going to be retired at halftime. So he showed up with a whole entourage, told the reporting pool, just stay in the car, we won't be long. They went in, they stood for the national anthem, and then they marched out. Outraged they were. We now find out that little charade cost $325,000. Let that sink in for a minute. Let that sink in the next time your kids don't have textbooks at school. When you hear the story coming out of Oklahoma of a teacher having to go in months in advance to go through all the desks to make sure that they all have little feet on them because you don't want one without because that'll cause a distraction and screw up your whole day. Just amazing stuff. And hey, look, the Trump administration still has some tentacles over at Fox News because some hush money evidently going to be flowing around. Remember Hope Hicks, communications person there? I don't know, fired, ousted, left, whatever, but gone. Some concern she might, sing, talk, worry, Evidently, she got a new gig over at Fox News. She's joining Fox as Executive Vice President and Chief Communications Officer. 29-year-old, very savvy, I guess. Look, they're saying, hey, she's a White House veteran. She was there for a cup of coffee. They're kind of wondering, what kind of international, broadcasting experience she has, which would be none. But understand, this isn't about that. This is about hush money. This is about got to take care of our friends, right? And it's about that kind of elite. We take care of our own. So Fox News will be there, and they're saying, look, it's an interesting time over at Fox. It'll be, she can maybe make some bones there if she's actually competent. We'll see. I'm personally hoping for a train wreck, hoping the whole thing goes down. But understand, it's the propaganda network. It's always going to be fine. The moneyed interests will always make sure that it weathers whatever stone pops up because, hey, guess what? It's the apologist channel for this administration. It's pushing all the conspiracy. It's pushing all of those Democrats. They're vicious and evil and rowdy and violent and messy. Of course, don't forget messy. That is what it is. Scary stuff. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go, wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Got an interesting week ahead. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's color like time of flood beneath